7 in the morning one Monday in February, and I was standing on the loading dock at Grove Lock on the Grand Union Canal near Milton Keynes. It's one of the few places left round here where boats have space to load cargo, in this case coal and diesel, onto a fuel boat that ploughs up and down this length of canal. In fact, there are two boats, one powered, the other nearest to the bank a butty, which can be towed or tied to the other as it is now. The coal is not a single consignment for trade delivery, but rather will be sold to boaters along the canal in 25-kilo bags. It's a good business in winter, as most liveaboard narrowboats have a coal stove, and they would be chilly without feeding it regularly. The first job was to get a few tons of it off the lorry and into the boat's cargo hold. This I felt best to leave to the professionals, who had it down to a fine art and threw the bags around as if they were filled with feathers. There are various brands, all slightly different in their formulation, and each boater will swear by their particular favourite. At 71.5 feet long, the boat and butty have plenty of space, and are historic, as the owner explains.
Toaster motorboat built at Northwich by a firm called Yarwoods in 1937. She's pretty much in original trim, as she would have been, other than bottles of gas and stuff on her, but she has been substantially rebuilt, but as was. She's had a lot of restoration work. The butty was built in 1936 by Harland & Wolff at Woolwich. It's known as a big Woolwich. We've done quite a bit of restoration on her, but there's a lot more to do yet. It's part of the pleasure though, because I love the old boats. If we had any sense, we'd have brand new boats and life would be very simple. But I like the old boats, and it's one of the reasons for doing this.
While most of the boat is cargo space, the back sports a tiny cabin where Jules and partner Richard can live as they travel. This is very traditional narrowboating in the space and the decor. A solid fuel stove in the corner keeps the steerer warm as they go and keeps water piping hot for tea. A bed folds down just beyond that curtain. So the accommodation is cramped, but the hold is not, each line of coal bags weighing about a ton. Today's delivery was relatively small and loaded up in a flash. Well, that's about 6.5 tons of coal loaded, which took about 45 minutes to an hour. We're just waiting for a diesel tanker to turn up, and that will stash 8,000 litres of diesel onto the boat, and then we'll be setting off. Not only are the boats historic, but this splendid fuel pump is clearly out of the ark as well. The diesel tank sits, not entirely reassuringly, underneath many cylinders of highly flammable propane. I'm assured it's entirely safe. Ah, here comes the fuel tanker. Richard likes to pop some fuel additive into the mix to prevent diesel bug and other nasties getting into his customers' tanks. It's a good idea, as not every boater will remember to do so themselves, so this saves them the bother and can prevent a whole heap of trouble. That done, the tanker pipe was unrolled over to the boats and the filling began. With filling complete, the boats were ready for the off, and the Lister JP2 could be started. This first involves pumping diesel into a day tank, from where it's gravity fed into the engine. That glass pipe constitutes the fuel gauge. This being a classic engine, it likes a little greasing on its nipples before it gets going. You can make your own jokes about that, I think. Opening these valves on the two cylinders releases the compression to make the hand-cranked start possible. Yes, hand-cranked.
There's a creak. There's the pump.
After a few turns to get it in the mood, Richard flicked the valve shut and the engine ran of its own accord. It's a proper vintage thing with a proper kaplunk kaplunk sound. The first delivery of the day was just on the other side of the canal and a boat length back, so Jules edged the pair of boats gently off the dock and towards the customer. Given the sheer weight of the fuel boats, there must be a fair bit of inertia, so gentle manoeuvring with a light touch is the order of the day.
Most of the time it's fine. On a tight bend sometimes it takes a bit of concentration, but no, they're pretty manoeuvrable.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it's like anything else. If you've been doing it for a while, I wouldn't dream of driving an Arctic, but I'm sure the chap who does it all his life finds it very straightforward, so it's what you get used to.
As Jules lined up the boats alongside, Richard was ready to tie onto the customer's boat, so all three stay together while the delivery is made. It's fuel this first customer wanted, so the cap was unscrewed, the hose plugged in, and 100 litres of fresh diesel pumped in. But his neighbour, the bloke in the high-vis jacket, wanted some coal as well, so rather than nudge the boat forward once we'd done this one, Richard and Jules slung the coal bags through onto the towpath. This is clearly not a job for anyone with a hernia. The bags stacked up, and the customer popped them onto his roof, as is customary on narrowboats. Like most boaters, he's a big fan of the fuel boats.
It's much easier for us because obviously we live aboard. We don't have to go out, load car, everything like that. Drop to the door, as you can see. Perfect for us. Perfect.
And do you feel you get a good deal off the coal boats?
Oh, definitely, and we're keeping them in trade as well, so it's always nice to keep, I'd love to have a working boat myself, so yeah, it's very good.
We were heading south, and that meant Grove Lock itself to deal with before we could go anywhere. Richard opened the lower gates, and Jules started to bring the fuel boats to the lock. Two boats side by side means both gates need opening. And more precision steering was called for. Here's the trick to wide locks. I do this myself. Just as you get there, knock the engine into neutral and step off with the centreline. The boat will drift gently into place and you have control of it with the rope. Wrapped around a bollard, the centreline is used as a brake, bringing the boat to a halt. And despite their 70 plus feet of length, there's plenty of space for the pair. Richard opened the gate paddles at the top, having already opened the ground ones. Normally you'd wait for the lock to fill a bit before opening the gate paddles in case the flow floods your bow, but that's not an issue with the way these boats are built. With the lock full, the top gates could be opened and the boats were ready to emerge. Richard and Jules working together in perfect harmony, the well-oiled machine of long experience. Paddles down again, as you must. Fear not the absence of anyone steering. It's not the Marie Celeste. Jules hopped on again as soon as the boat was clear, and we were on our way. There is nothing sophisticated about how the boat and butty are paired. It's good old-fashioned rope at the front and back. With no good mooring spots on this stretch, we could just chug on apace, but the next customer was not far away. You may be wondering how on earth you order from a fuel boat which could float past you at any time. Well, it's here that old meets very up to date.
The regulars get texted when I know where they are. So they get a text the night before, a couple of days before. We also advertise on Facebook what we're doing. We put a schedule out. Otherwise, yes, flag downs.
The next delivery, 2 deliveries in fact, were amongst this line of moored boats. They'd sent their orders in advance, which was good as neither customer was aboard. Once again, Richard stood like a lion ready to pounce on a gazelle, while Jules brought the fuel boat gently alongside. With both stern dollies on the customer boat already wrapped in mooring rope, Richard had to improvise quickly and tie to the taffrail seats instead. A blast of reverse brought the boats to a halt. With the order having been sent in advance, all Richard had to do was leave the supplies, where else but on the roof. That done, we nudged a couple of 100 yards further along to the next delivery point, where again the customer was not at home. Just as the fuel finished going in, another customer jogged up the towpath. He'd moved his boat since placing his order, and the fuel boat, not knowing this, had gone past. Too late, we couldn't easily reverse, so his coal got unloaded to the towpath. He also brought a jerry can to fill with diesel to keep him going until the fuel boat came back the other way in a few days. Despite missing his slot, he's still a fan of the system.
It's just convenience, you know. I mean, they're down here regular, they let you know when it's happening. Just put your order in and they serve. It's superb and traditional. I'd rather keep the money going to these guys than using marinas and getting overcharged. Simple as that. They're a lovely couple as well.
There was just the matter of some coal onto this boat's roof as ever, and then we could move on. When a customer isn't around, the bill is stuffed somewhere obvious and will be paid by bank transfer or credit card later. How well this works apparently depends on where you are on the canals. Along here, they're good and reliable payers. Richard now pulled the rope away and we could head into the second lock of the day. Not so easy to jump off this one because of the bridge immediately beforehand, but there are steps to the side, and Richard leapt up and opened the gates just in time. That lack of towpath access meant a clamber up the ladder for Jules, whereupon the centre line was used to stop the boats drifting back in the lock when the water starts pouring in. And pour it did, with Richard and Jules opening up all the paddles in quick succession. Again, not a problem for these boats with their high bow, but not recommended on those with an open well deck. The rope around the bollard got slacker as the boat rose, of course, but the pull on it is all at the start when the paddles are open, so that's fine. But there was a problem getting out. The gate on the right wouldn't open fully. There was loads of canal debris in the way, just old twigs and branches. A quick hoik with the barge pole and the obstruction was cleared. We were on our way again, and a viewer said hello.
That's Cruising the Cut. That's Cruising the Cut, isn't it?
With a while to go to the next customer, and no moorings along here for people to flag us down, the motorboat was now untied from the butty, like the Enterprise detaching the saucer section. It went ahead so as to tow the butty instead, because there's less drag that way, both boats being in line rather than side by side. That makes it faster for the stretches where they know they're not going to stop. And it's a slick operation. If I did this, I'd be tied up in knots for several minutes and cause a major obstruction. But Richard just glides past, picks up the bowline and hooks it to the motorboat, letting a length pay out until the boats are the right distance apart. Jules now steers the butty independently but pulled by the motorboat. This gives you a better idea of the distance between them. Notice, incidentally, that Jules steers the butty slightly offset from the motorboat. That's so it's not being pushed back by the wash from the propeller, which would, in effect, make the two boats fight each other. And just a note that if you ever meet a working boat coming the other way at a bridge hole, check it's not towing before you try to go through. Jules told me that many's the time an oncoming boat has failed to realise there's a butty on a rope, and chaos has ensued. With another customer on the horizon, it was time for a reverse of the splitting apart, again performed enviably swiftly. With the motorboat stopped, the butty just drifted alongside, and before you knew it, they were together again. Here's the final customer we'll be meeting in this video. He's ordered coal, lots of coal.
It saves me having to drag the coal up and down the towpath. It's nearly a mile to the nearest car park, and I couldn't do without it.
A typical bag of coal briquettes costs maybe £8 to £12, depending on what you're buying. How long it lasts just depends on how cold it is. I asked Jules what this life is really like.
Busy, yeah, grubby, but great fun, very rewarding. If you work hard, you can make a living at it, but you have to keep going, you can't stop. Yeah, I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world. We're knocking on a bit now, so I suppose things will come to a close sometimes, but it's good.
Onwards, ever onwards. There were more customers to be found and more locks to go through. Ever so gently, the pair were brought to the gates while the lock, which was full, was emptied. Then they could go in, but it was time for me to say goodbye. The deliveries will continue for another couple of hours today, but I've got to walk back to the car, so I'm hopping off at this point. It's going to be quite a pleasant amble back in the sunshine, I think. I'll leave you with this shot of the fuel boats in the lock. Cheerio.